Namaskar and welcome to In Focus. For many months now, the country has been waiting for the former Finance Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh to speak out. But despite his recent elevation to the Congress Working Committee and his appointment as chairman of the Congress Party's Monitoring Committee, Dr. Manmohan Singh has kept his silence. Yet today, in a series of two exclusive interviews for In Focus, Dr. Manmohan Singh has now been prepared to speak about the state of politics and the state of the economy in India. Next week in part 2, we shall interview Dr. Manmohan Singh about his new political role, his party and his views about corruption in politics. But first, tonight in part 1, we talk to him about the state of the economy, his fears and what he thinks needs to be done to put the situation right. Dr. Manmohan Singh, later in this interview, there will be many people who will want to hear how you would have responded to the problems our economy faces today. But first, I want to ask you about how you see the state of the economy and whether you share some of the concern. So let me put a simple question. How do you see the state of the economy today?
Well, Karan, we left the Indian economy in very good shape. Last year, national income grew by 6.5%. Export growth for third year in a row increased by nearly 20%. Industrial production increased by over 12%, and by the time we left, we had brought the inflation rate down to less than 5%. Overall, the economy was in good shape, and since then, it will take quite some time to find out how the economy is going to evolve in the current year. But there are signs which worry me. Export growth in the first half of the current year has slowed down very substantially, as against the 26% increase that took place in April, September last year. This year it is under 10%. Industrial growth rate also has slowed down from over 12% to about 9%. Similarly, inflation rate is going up, and I heard the finance minister to say that 6 to 7% inflation rate is acceptable. Finance minister has promised that he will work to keep the fiscal deficit at 5% of GDP. But this is contingent on his being successful in mobilizing 5,000 crores through the proceeds of disinvestment. We don't know whether that will materialize. Fertilizer subsidies are going up. Food subsidies are going up. I recognize there is a role for fertilizer subsidies, there is a role for food subsidies, but the way they are increasing, well, does worry me as with regard to their impact on the fiscal deficit that may emerge at the end of the current year. Import growth has sharply declined. In fact, in the first half of the current fiscal year, import growth in dollar terms is down by about 3%. Overall growth is also modest, plus 5%, but largely because of 42% increase in the import of oil and oil products. Now that is not a measure of our success. In fact, it appears to me that oil production is likely to be lower than last year. Having said that, I would say that there are still about 4 or 5 months, and the economy has the potential to grow at the rate of 6.5% minimum this year. After all, if agricultural production this year increases at 4%, it will not require much effort to raise the growth rate of the economy to about 6.5%, the same level as we achieved last year. It will require, I think, a lot of mismanagement if the economy were to do much worse than it did last year.
Dr. Saab, whether we have the mismanagement or not, of course, we can only tell in the future. But at the moment, the situation as you see it is a worrying situation. Things are not going in the right direction.
Well, let me say that there are, I think, signs that the economy is slowing down. There are also signs that the firmness of purpose with which the economy should be handled is not there. Take, for example, the case of 2,000 crores that the government have allocated for 7 basic services. They said they'll come with a new formula to decide upon the allocation of this amount to the states. We don't know how it has been divided. Similarly, the finance minister in his budget speech set aside 800 crores extra for irrigation projects. It has got bogged down in controversy between Karnataka on the one hand and Andhra on the other. Now, this sort of ad hocism does worry me.
You know, you spoke about the economy slowing down. You also mentioned that perhaps the industrial production was down by 3%. Others say it could be down by 6%. There are other reports which suggest, for instance, that company profits are down by 10% in the steel production area, televisions, even Vanaspati. All the productions have slowed down. Is this cyclical or is this something more serious?
Well, let me say that the fact that agricultural production this year is likely to be up by 4%, there is a chance to make up for the loss of momentum that was experienced in the first half of the current year. So I am not one who is a prophet of gloom. The economy has a lot of maneuverability. This government has inherited a very good economy, foreign exchange situation, inflation rate, a booming economy. So if they take full advantage of that, they should aim at a 7% growth rate.
And if they don't?
Well, I would say that this year the 7% growth rate will not, I think, involve a major effort. After all, if agricultural production is growing at 4%, it does not require much effort to push the growth rate to 7%. And anything lower than that...
But Dr. Saab, we're relying entirely on agriculture, on all the industry statistics, on manufacturing, on imports, on exports, on FIIs and on the stock market. Everything is going south.
Well, I share your concern, but what I'm saying is there is still, I think, 4 or 5 months. And I will not say that the economy is slipping so badly that good management cannot bring it back onto the rails. I very much hope that the economy will be handled with the care that it needs. And you heard the finance minister yesterday expressing his robust optimism. I wish him good luck.
Well, we all wish him good luck, and I want very much to talk to you about the management and also about your prescriptions for management. But just before we move to that, let's just clear the air in terms of the state of the economy. When you handed over office in May, June, FII money coming into this country was somewhere in the region of $350 million a month. In September, it came down to 60. Now, do you see that as a sign that foreign investors are shying away?
I think one has to recognize that there is a nervousness in the investment community, both at home and abroad. And that is not due to anything specific that this government may have done, but the composition of the government, the fact that you have 13 political parties, the fact that their ministers often don't speak in the same voice, I think it does cause nervousness. For example, Mr. Maran has been talking about further liberalization of the industrial policy regime. The finance minister has been saying that there will be no reversal of the liberalization policy. But we have the civil aviation ministers that he will send back foreign investors who have invested in our civil aviation ministry. We've heard the deputy chairman of the planning commission calling for further tightening of the foreign investment policy. So people want to know, where does this government stand?
Not just that, sir. The CPI and the CPM are strongly against all measures of deregulation in the insurance sector. They're completely against disinvestment. That adds to the confusion and the concern, doesn't it?
Well, it does add to concern, but I know that the government and all those people who are part of this government worked hard to produce that document, the minimum common program. Now, they have listed, for example, the insurance sector reforms as one area of priority concern. I sincerely hope that they will fulfill, I think, that promise.
Do you expect them to fulfill it? Hope is one thing, expectation is another.
Well, as of now, I think taking into account the controversies in which the government is bogged down, I think there is, a question mark.
One of the biggest question marks this government faces is something that industrialists across the country seem to express with one voice. They're complaining about the high cost of money, what they call a liquidity crunch. Mr. Chidambaram, on the other hand, is on record as saying that industry must learn to live with a tighter money regime. Do you share the concern of industrialists?
Well, let me say that it can be exaggerated. If you look at the previous 2 years, the Governor of the Reserve Bank himself has pointed out that bank credit, non-food credit, in the last 2 years increased by nearly 57%. Now, if there has been shortage, it has been shortage, I think, in the context that the industrialists were not able to mobilize the amount of money by way of GDR mechanism. They were not able to mobilize the needed amount of money in the domestic capital market. I think the remedy for all these issues is not to pump more credit recklessly. I am all for, I think, providing credit to the extent that it accelerates, moves the wheels of production faster. But we cannot solve all our problems merely by printing more currency.
Here you sound a lot more like Mr. Chidambaram than you did earlier on, isn't it?
Well, I think sound monetary management, control of inflation, the maintenance of a viable balance of payment positions are prerequisite of sustained progress of our country. And nothing should be done to jeopardize, I think, these things.
Of course, Mr. Chidambaram says very clearly that the present high cost of money and the liquidity crunch that we're experiencing is a direct result of what he calls your single point agenda of controlling inflation by squeezing the money supply and causing the crunch in the first place.
Well, let me say, first of all, when we were in office, we succeeded in raising the growth rate and bringing inflation down. Last year, growth rate was 6.5%. Last year, industrial production was record 12%. And we ended the year with an inflation rate of less than 5%. So nobody can accuse us that we had a single mind preoccupation. I take pride in the fact that we brought the inflation rate down, but we did this in a manner which did not hurt the growth process. The challenge before the present government is to repeat a similar performance, and I wish them success in that.
Of course, let me just put once again what Mr. Chidambaram might have said to that, because he said it several times in public. He says that you brought inflation down, but you did it by deliberately delaying and postponing difficult decisions like the hike in petroleum prices, as a result of which his government has had to administer sharp increases and cause pain.
Well, I do admit that I think petroleum prices should have been increased, but let me say that this year, if agricultural production increases by 4%, you have plenty of maneuverability to keep inflation rate at less than 5%, even after adjusting the administered prices of petroleum products.
So when he talks of a 6 to 8% inflation rate,
it worries me. It worries me about a mindset which I think justifies inflation rate of an order which I think is not good for sound macro management, which I believe is not good for the management of our balance of payments.
Okay, underlying Dr. Manmohan Singh, our entire discussion so far have been two concerns. In a sense, the rate of growth of our GDP, and associated with that, the size of our fiscal deficit. When you left office, despite your prudence and your caution, the deficit was 5.9%. Despite all the problems we are experiencing this year, and your concern about the government's ability to manage it, the finance minister keeps insisting he's going to reduce the deficit to 5%. Is that achievable?
Well, let me say that I hope he is right. He has the figures. I don't have the access to the figures. But what is happening to food subsidies, what is happening to fertilizer subsidies, and if import growth remains as sluggish as has been the case in the first half of the current years, if disinvestment process does not proceed as he has planned, then there would be a cause for worry.
What do you expect the fiscal deficit to be?
Well, I would like it to be 5%.
But what do you expect it to be?
Well, as of now, it's too early to say. I think we are just now in the busy season of the current fiscal years. I still believe that it is possible to achieve a 5% fiscal deficit, but it requires a coordinated, coherent effort on the part of the government.
Let me push you a little on this, Dr. Saab. You didn't achieve it despite your prudence. We're not seeing the same prudence, the same caution here. Is it likely they'll achieve it?
Well, I would not like to judge the government at this stage. The finance minister has reiterated, and I think we should trust his word that he will
give him the benefit of the doubt.
Well, I trust him. I think he's a very competent person.
Okay, let me push you on something else in that case. You achieved a record GDP growth in your last year of 6.5 or 6.7%, depending upon which figure one goes by. The finance minister is insisting, so is the prime minister insisting, despite all the problems that we've been talking about,
that
they're going to achieve the same target?
Well, it should not be difficult. Last year's 6.5 or 6.7% growth rate was achieved solely on the basis of non-agricultural growth. We had a record growth of 12% in industrial production. This year, because of the bounty of nature, agricultural production is going to increase by about 4%.
But the trick is management, isn't it?
So achieving 6.5% is not a difficult task, frankly speaking.
But the trick is management, managing the industrial sector, managing exports, imports, and all the rest of that. Isn't that the trick?
Yes, I agree with that.
Dr. Saab, we have to take a commercial break at this point, but I want to continue the discussion in just a little while. Don't go away. We'll be back in just a couple of minutes. Welcome back to part 2 of our exclusive interview with Dr. Manmohan Singh. You've told us about the state of the economy as you see it, and it's fairly clear that you've identified worrying trends. Let me then ask you what you think the government should be doing. And let me put this to you. If you were finance minister, what would be the 3 most important things you would want to do to tackle the state of affairs as you've described it?
Well, first of all, we must persist with the fiscal correction. Secondly, the government must speak with one voice about its policies. There is already enough of confusion, and investment in the final analysis is an act of faith. It takes a long time to build confidence. It takes very little time to destroy it. The third thing that I would say is that we all know that India's infrastructure is going to be a bottleneck to achieving a high rate of growth. We all know about it. There is a broad consensus that India needs a lot more investment in power. India needs a lot more investment in telecommunication, in roads, in ports. And we need to place credible mechanisms, regulatory mechanisms, reformed management system, reformed tariff policies, so that all these sectors function in a manner as to inspire confidence.
You mentioned 3 broad things. Let me just take them up one by one. To what extent do you think that the fiscal discipline the government needs is vitiated by the fact that they seem to be refusing to take difficult decisions?
Well, this is the first year of the government. There are 13 political parties. I do not minimize their difficulties, but I would certainly assume that governance of a country of India's size and complexity demands that the issues of management should be taken as seriously as they deserve to be taken.
And that clearly is not happening at the moment.
Well, as I said, there are signs which cause us worry. Take, for example, the bonus decision. The railway minister was able to pressurize the cabinet without worrying about the consequences for the rest of the economy. The cabinet approved that. There was a strike which paralyzed our telecommunication system, our postal system for 7 days. The cabinet could not meet because the Prime Minister was away in the northeast. After 7 days, they removed the ceiling. I think these decisions need to be taken with greater care, mindful of the consequences of any particular action in all sectors, rather than paying attention only to the pressure emanating from one sector.
There's a similar decision coming up. The 5th Pay Commission has recommended a 30% basic salary increase. How would you suggest they should handle it?
Well, as far as I remember, I had budgeted about 5,000 crores as likely extra expenditure that may be necessary on account of the recommendations of the Pay Commission. Now, I don't know how much money Mr. Chidambaram has set aside, but if the Pay Commission report costs a very serious, a much more onerous burden, I think that's a matter which should be discussed with the National Development Council, because what we do in the center has implications for the state, it has implications for the public sector. There is such a thing as the paying capacity of the government as a whole, but all these decisions cannot be taken by the finance minister. He needs the support of his cabinet colleagues, and I think in an issue like this, even the National Development Council should be involved.
Okay, one of the first thing you're then suggesting is that they should be prudent rather than populist. But you know, Dr. Manmohan Singh, you can only be prudent if you are clear in your purpose. And isn't that the second problem, lack of clarity of purpose?
Well, I wouldn't, I think, go that far. If you look at the minimum program, I compliment them that despite their diverse background, they were able to produce this document, which I think by and large our party has endorsed. The trick of the trade is how do you implement, I think, what they have said are the goals. I would like this government to live up to the expectations aroused by what they have stated in their minimum program.
Okay, fiscal prudence was the first thing you suggested. The second thing you suggested was unity and consensus amongst them. Now that's a political problem. They're not achieving it. And it looks, with every developing day, that the divisions, the different voices are getting worse. Does that worry you?
It does worry me. As I said, investment in the final analysis is an act of faith. It takes a long time to build confidence of investors. It takes very little time to destroy it.
The Bombay Stock Exchange suggests that faith is being destroyed every day.
Well, the state of the capital market does worry me a great deal. If we have to mobilize a lot more resources from the capital market, then we need a buoyant capital market to enable our entrepreneurs to raise a lot more money for modernization, for expansion.
And in the absence of that buoyant market, the disinvestment of 5,000 crores that they need is not going to be realized, is it?
There is a question mark. There is a question mark.
Which means that the fiscal deficit at 5% is pretty unrealistic, isn't it?
Well, I think if they do not succeed in raising 5,000 crores to that extent, I think the task of keeping to the fiscal deficit target will be a lot more difficult.
The third thing you suggested that they had to do to put things right was infrastructural development. Are they doing it?
Well, I think piecemeal, one hears a lot of pronunciations, but quite frankly, 5 years is a long enough period. We should have done a lot more in streamlining the management of infrastructure, streamlining the management of the power sector, laying down clear, transparent rules for the regulation of new entry, for fixation of prices. But I think at the end of the day, the country and the rest of the world is not going to wait forever. Investors have many options. Those who want to come to India, they have the option to go to China, they have the option to go to many other countries. The whole world is faced with scarcity of capital. If India does not get its act together, then our ambitions for a much higher rate of growth, a better life, better quality of life for the people of India, our ambitions to get rid of chronic poverty, ignorance and disease, we'll have to say goodbye to it.
You said the world is not going to wait forever. How much longer will they wait?
Well, I think there is already a certain amount of nervousness. People do not doubt the intentions of the government. The Prime Minister spoke to the World Economic Forum. The Finance Minister has spoken. I think they have a very good, team in the Finance Minister, the Industries Minister, the Commerce Minister.
It's not intentions, it's ability to deliver.
It is, that's what I'm saying is, I think intentions are not in doubt. It is a question of capabilities, the ability to put forward a coherent program of action and then to implement it. I think they need to get their act together in this area.
Very briefly, Dr. Saab, if the sort of things you want them to do to correct the situation don't happen between now and April, how bad will the situation be then?
If cogent, sensible decisions are not taken now and the next few months, then we will be piling up trouble for the next fiscal year. There are such things as leads and lags in economic phenomena. If you don't act and you act unwisely, it does not produce results immediately, but in the medium term, it can have disastrous consequences.
Well, Dr. Saab, I'm afraid we're going to have to end this part of this interview. At that point, let's all hope that they do act and the disastrous consequences don't happen. Next week, I want to talk to you about yourself, your new role, your party, and the general politics of the country. That'll be next week at the same time in this program. But till then, goodbye.